Part two, I'm going to get into creating the backgrounds, creating all the little additional doodads that I'm requiring. I require a background that shouldn't just be totally arbitrary. You can draw it from memory, from imagination if you want, but I would like you to be thoughtful about what's there, what's behind. If you want to think about like the environment that this animal is in. I think this is an animal that I've seen um, at the lake in North Carolina. I think he's a water bird. I don't think he's a seabird. My bird knowledge is so crappy, uh, embarrassing. But I'm just going to do a little search for a you know a kind of southern or mid-Atlantic lake scene. Uh, in one lake in particular, just as a, I'm not going to literally copy anything, but I'll just get a sense of, yeah, I get a sense of like what the landscape kind of looks like. And I could literally copy things if I want. That's up to you. I'm gonna save this thing to my desktop and I'll import. I could just drag them in, but to show you the import to library here, and then imported that. You can see I've got, even though I erased my earlier bird from the stage from the layer, it's still available there in the library. It actually imports these files. Whoops, I don't have a layer to bring it onto. You can't drag it onto a layer that has a motion tween. They won't let you do that. So we'll put it behind. And I'm not going to copy this thing literally, but I'm going to think about the water. I'm going to think about some trees. So you can either have a landscape that is still or even one that's in motion. So you need a background. You need to have one either animated color or animated gradient. I'll show you how to do an animated gradient to have a kind of change in the lighting, like the sunset or something like that. So let's just, I have this guy up here. I'm going to create a couple more. I'm going to create one layer with like the lake, and it's going to be very simple. Remind me to stop if I get too involved. I could go on forever. But I'll just be very simple here. I'm starting on a new blank layer, I think, yes. And I'm just going to create a little, oops, whoa. Like I'm not orientated correctly. That's a bad color for the water. I would probably want to sample the color. And maybe I'll give it a little bit of a, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger than the size of the stage so that I can show you a little something I like to call the scrolling background. And I want you to like actually interpret imagery. Don't just like whole hog use whatever you find online. I want to see some design or some editorializing on nature, especially in Flash. Think about being efficient with the way that you. Okay, so I have my basic stuff here. Something like this would be great. You can animate the waves, that kind of thing. That would be amazing. But I'm not gonna force you to do any of that stuff. One thing that I really liked when I was growing up and starting to look at computer games or video games was the parallax scrolling was like a big feature in the gaming systems that were coming out when I was a kid. Sega Genesis had parallax scrolling. I'm just gonna make some trees. I guess I am being kind of literal here, but I don't want to get too much into the weeds. And if I wanted to, I could put like each of these parts of the landscape on different layers, and they could scroll by at different rates. So, but we're not going to do that. What I am going to do is just have this scene scrolling by, and actually, instead of this white background, that's like a nothing in the background. I could leave it as it is, obviously, but I'm going to do a colored gradient in the background. I've just created, here's my background, and of course if you want to rename your layers, landscape and sun, maybe I'll try to do a sunrise. I could do a sunrise, and that's actually very easy as can be. Let me change the color. I'm going to start with like a real gray, limited options here. I wanted something that's like, oh, that's a nice color. Something like a little more blue. And now I'm actually going to create a little bit bigger than the stage, as I said earlier. I'm going to hit that stroke. I should have said no stroke. No stroke. And then, okay. And so I'm actually going to make this background be a linear gradient. Right now it's totally the wrong colors. I can drag some of these colors away. I want it to be fairly simple. I want it to go from blue to, I don't know. First I'll have it start off as like this grayish color. And I don't like the direction it's going. I think that gray should be a little lighter, a little more contrast there. That's good. I don't like the direction of my linear gradient. If I want to change that, I can just click on the paint bucket and change it. The point where I begin to drag and the point where I end, the length of that line will include the entire gradient. So if I only do a short line, it's going to be a very sharp gradient. If I do a longer line, it's going to be a smoother gradient. Or if I start off, I guess it doesn't work if I start off, but okay, so that's like a nice smooth gradient. I'm actually going to turn this into not a shape tween, not a motion tween, but a shape tween. If I want to animate a gradient, that's what I want to do. So I'm just going to create a keyframe here. Convert to keyframe, and then I can just change the gradient, make sure this is selected, and just change the gradient. What I'll do is I'll just change the color in this final situation. Maybe it'll be more of a yellow light, suggestive of sunrise instead of sunset. Perhaps. Maybe I'll change the, I could even have like a little, I could have a circular gradient, which could imply like the sun actually rising. I could actually have a rising sun if I wanted to in the same way. But look at the smooth transition. I could also do something where I have a translucent layer on top of everything that kind of gets more opaque. Translucency or transparency, sorry, yes, or opacity can be edited in this A. Red, green, blue, A is alpha. Okay, so I have this sunrise coming up. So you can either do that, or if you turned this rectangle into a motion tween rather than a shape tween, you can animate just the color overlay. And you can do that by turning it into a motion tween, then clicking on the motion tween, and in the properties panel you would have these color settings. And I know that's annoying and complicated, but that's the program we're dealing with. So here you have that. Here's my landscape. I'm gonna now make this landscape. You know, it's enough. This isn't enough of detail for the landscape. I want a rich, kind of varied, complex landscape. So I want. I'm gonna. You don't have to make it scroll, but that's an option, and I'm gonna make mine scroll. One additional thing I want you to do is to explore. Let's do one more thing. Explore bitmap fill. It's not a really big deal, but it's something that can add texture, literally, and richness to your animation. So I'm just going to have a simple shape like this in my background, and I'm going to select it. And instead of a solid color or a gradient, I can do this other option, bitmap fill, and I can kind of just choose somewhere. I had this, I downloaded this this sponge texture. I wonder where he went to. I think I called it sponge, did I not? There it is. And here's like a sponge. That doesn't look great. But use one example, at least one example of texture as well. Download some textures. You can also do this thing where if I turn this into a symbol, rock, I can then change that color effect. So if I actually want to make him feel like he's not just a texture, he's more of a resident of this universe, of this world, I can mess with him a little bit more. Here's another thing I'll get into next week, but in addition, if you make this symbol, this rock, a movie clip, then you have the ability to go into these special filters, like drop shadow, for instance. If you want him to cast his own shadow, of course you could draw on a shadow all day long. Strength, angle, distance, angle, whatever. Maybe he'll cast the shadow underneath. It's not great. You know, you can also do a blur. You can do some other things. So you're also actually committed to doing oh, let me do that. That's one thing I've forgotten. Let's create this whole thing into a motion tween. They're all going to be a symbol, and then I'm going to start off by having this guy, oops, wrong layer. My background's going to start off over there, and then at the end I'll just have him end here. The background doesn't really, it's not going to make a difference if the background moves or not, or if the sunrise moves or not. Let's see what it looks like. Oh, there's that little hole in there that looks bad, but that's not too bad. I don't really need the scroll. It's kind of awful now. My birds are better. So you be the judge about whether you want to make a scroll or not. Maybe I'm going to not have a scroll. When we do walk cycles, you'll probably want to, it might be a requirement to have a scrolling background. I think it will be actually. But for us, for this one, we're not going to do it. Let's test it again. See a bit of the sunrise. Now here's a funny thing. If you want the whole space to be filled with light, I can create a layer on top. I mentioned this a moment ago. Let's just start off with kind of bluish gray. And obviously we don't want to block the entire frame. I'm just going to start off that way and then create a motion tween. And that motion tween is going to have a color effect placed on it. I can either do alpha or advanced, and I have all the options I want. So he's going to start like this. It's kind of dark. Maybe he'll start really dark. And you see that blend, it just puts a cast over everything. Isn't that fun? And then I still have my alpha thing there, and maybe I'll keep I'll turn it a little more translucent, but then I'll turn down the blue, turn up. You can play with these settings. I kind of sort of know what I'm doing. I'll turn up the red and everything, and then I guess that'll be more of a light-filled space. How's that going to look? It's hard to see if that illusion is really going to be captured. But let's take a look. It's dark. Look at that. It's like a morning on the lake. The birds are flying. Not horrible. You know, but it's just all these like simple kind of stupid things together. You just learn about how to get across those little sensorial details. What things can move? What kind of simple changes can you make to the environment to give this sort of palpable reality? In addition, I did want you to do one more movement, which can be a falling leaf or something like that. I think what I'll do is, so background, moving or not, animated either gradient via shape tween or change animated color change via motion tween, and then one additional movement. I'm just going to actually have a little fish. Little fish, he'll just be a light color of water, and he's just going to, maybe I'll zoom in a bit. If I zoom in, I get a little bit more. Whoa. My computer is slowing down for no good reason. I don't have too much at play here. And watch out for this. One thing we noticed in class, you definitely don't want object drawing to be on, especially if you're doing frame by frame animation. Let's lock everything except for the layer I'm working on. There we go. Now I can see what I'm doing. Great. It's going to be just like a little puddle in the pool, in the lake. Might have to end this fairly soon. Yeah, just play around. Not everything has to be logical. These frame things are just spreading out as they will in a ripple. Let's see, does ripple work? Maybe, maybe not. Okay, and then I want to make it disappear in the last frame. So one more empty frame. And let's see. Yeah, there's a little ripple. Voila. And you can have several ripples going on different places. I mean, just go to town on this. I did a lot in under an hour.